Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss our proposed National Security Plan, Proactive, Partnered, and Prepared, a new national security strategy for Canada. My name is Winnie Guo. I am the Assistant Secretary to Cabinet in Planning and Priorities at the PCO. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Yvonne Chen, the Assistant Secretary to Cabinet in Economic Development, Jared Rabinovich, the Assistant Secretary to Cabinet in International Security, and Joel West Sadler, the Assistant Secretary to Cabinet in Security and Intelligence. Next slide, please. To begin, some background. When we talk about national security, the traditional image is military threats and espionage, but today it's much broader than that. National security now includes economic resilience, supply chains, cybersecurity, and the protection of our democratic institutions. Increasingly, the biggest risks to Canada aren't tanks crossing borders. They're economic coercion, infrastructure vulnerabilities, and geopolitical instability. Simultaneously, the global system itself is shifting. We're entering a new world order marked by intensifying great power competition, rising protectionism, and weakening assumptions about the stability of the post-World War II rules-based order. Next slide, please. Public opinion polls from Angus Reid, Ecos, and Nanos Research suggest that there is a rapidly growing desire amongst Canadians to prioritize our securitization. Canadian support for investment in international security has reached 62%, an increase of 21% over the past 5 years. In the new environment of unpredictability, reacting after threats emerge simply isn't enough. Canada needs to take a proactive approach, one that builds resilience before it's tested and ensures we can act independently when necessary. Based on our analysis, we've identified 3 areas where proactive investment will have the greatest impact on Canada's long-term security: Arctic security, critical infrastructure expansion, and foreign relations diversification. We acknowledge that we need to be strategic about what we prioritize, and we are prioritizing using these 3 criteria: severity, urgency, and capacity. First, severity. These identified priorities all directly affect Canada's economic stability and strategic autonomy. They represent structural issues, not peripheral ones. Second, urgency. Public polling shows growing concern among Canadians about defense readiness and infrastructure resilience. At the same time, Arctic traffic is rising, global protectionism is intensifying, and geopolitical competition is accelerating. These pressures are happening now. Third, capacity. Canada has the institutional capacity to act in these areas. Other national security threats, including climate change and global health, are not solvable by Canada alone. These priorities are deliverable by Canada without over-reliance on foreign partners. We must recognize that, at the end of the day, hard decisions need to be made. We cannot fall into the trap of over-promising and under-delivering. Next slide, please. Now I will speak about our core priorities for national security. First, Arctic security. The Arctic is transforming rapidly. Climate change is opening new shipping routes, exposing critical resources, and attracting growing interest from Russia and China. However, Canada's surveillance systems are limited and aging, and our operational presence remains limited. Closing the gap means modernizing Arctic infrastructure, strengthening our surveillance capacity, and working closely with Inuit communities. Second, critical infrastructure expansion. Economic independence and national security are now inseparable. Countries are increasingly using supply chains, manufacturing capacity, and industrial policy as tools of influence. Canada's reliance on external supply chains in key sectors creates vulnerabilities. By investing in domestic infrastructure and building more robust supply chains, Canada reduces exposure and strengthens our long-term security foundation. Third, foreign relations diversification. Canada has long benefited from a stable international system and a close partnership with the United States. That relationship remains essential, but the global environment is becoming more fragmented and less predictable. Resilience means ensuring we're not overly dependent on a single partner. That requires proactively strengthening ties with other trusted countries, diversifying our partnerships, and maintaining the flexibility to protect Canadian interests in a more competitive world. Taken together, Arctic security, critical infrastructure expansion, and foreign relations diversification represent the areas where proactive action today is most necessary to guarantee Canada's future resilience. Importantly, these priorities are not isolated. They reinforce one another. While they represent a meaningful evolution in Canada's national security posture, their interconnected nature keeps them realistic and within Canada's capacity to deliver. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Winnie. I will now discuss our first priority, Arctic security. Canadian Arctic security is becoming more urgent as northern sea ice continues to melt. Since 2013, larger shipping vessels have sailed into the Arctic region in far greater numbers. Despite our territorial claim to the Canadian Arctic, our ability to effectively monitor and enforce that claim remains limited, primarily due to a lack of effective infrastructure. For the United States, traditionally our closest Arctic defense partner, Northern defense has been framed as the need for full spectral dominance, meaning that our allies strive for perfect surveillance gathering and modeling practices to inform decision-making. But under Arctic conditions, that level of coverage is extraordinarily difficult to achieve. With limited all-season infrastructure and a low capacity for traditional military action, Canada must build an interconnected network of surveillance systems, known as a surveillance ecosystem. Next slide, please. Building a surveillance ecosystem means recognizing that perfect coverage of the entire Arctic is neither efficient nor achievable. Instead, we focus on what matters most, the entrances and exits to the Northwest Passage on Canada's eastern shorelines and areas that are the target of infrastructure development. The development of new surveillance equipment must be realized through a combination of early warning systems, maritime identification equipment, weather pattern monitoring tools, and other visual identification systems. By combining these systems, we can approximate full spectral dominance by focusing on the most crucial areas in the Arctic. The proposed seasonal port within the Northwest Passage at Grays Bay is an excellent focus point for much of our within-passage surveillance equipment. The completion of the Grays Bay project is expected to be many years away, though many of our existing sensor station projects are anticipated to be completed within the next 4 years. Canada's first defense industrial strategy is a key lever for making this surveillance ecosystem practical. Drones, for example, can fulfill multiple operational roles at significantly lower cost than manned platforms. Proven systems in other countries demonstrate how maritime drones can meaningfully contribute to a surveillance environment, while also offering search and rescue, enforcement, and even limited strike capacity. The Defence Industrial Strategy's proposed Drone Innovation Hub demonstrates that Canada's capacity for domestic development is feasible. Domestic procurement of a platform capable of fulfilling operational requirements is expected to take between 4 and 8 years, with costing estimates ranging between $150 to $200 million. This accounts for research and development and procurement costs, drawn from the funds allocated to the Drone Innovation Hub. Indigenous knowledge and practices continue to play a unique role in surveillance and security in the Canadian North. Canadian rangers are vital for visual identification, search and rescue, and sovereignty patrols. Despite their importance, the Canadian Rangers currently have few paid working days, making their profession unsustainable. An increase in the average number of working days is a cost-effective measure that bolsters the surveillance ecosystem while also enabling the Canadian Armed Forces to more effectively meet its recruitment goals. This increase in funding is expected to cost roughly $12 million, doubling the average expected operational days of the Rangers. This can be drawn from the $218 million set aside for a permanent Arctic presence into the 2024 defense policy, to be administered beginning in the 2026 budget cycle. The estimated total cost of building this ecosystem is approximately $650 million. This covers research, procurement, and expanded ranger support costs. Through making our Arctic waters more secure and accessible, Canada further enables shipping and economic development in our northern regions. As well, domestic research and procurement initiatives tied to advanced sensor systems and drone systems will invest in Canadian innovation and commercialization. Next slide, please. This strategy deliberately considers and mitigates key risks associated with Arctic defense. Arctic operational risks are mitigated through unmanned systems, collaboration with local communities, and a targeted geographic focus. Additionally, we focus investment in high-tech but proven systems that are tailored towards Canada's operational requirements. The recommendation to adopt drones, for example, is grounded in their demonstrated success internationally. Finally, the integrated ecosystem model itself provides built-in redundancy. By layering multiple platforms and technologies, the system itself remains resilient. If one component is delayed or compromised, others can compensate temporarily, maintaining overall surveillance capacity. Lastly, on communications. Our strategy should be framed as an investment in Arctic modernization. As sea ice continues to melt and activity increases, surveillance capacity becomes an investment in our economy and sovereignty, not simply a military procurement exercise. Emphasizing northern infrastructure and long-term resilience will likely resonate more strongly with Canadians than messaging focused narrowly on enforcement measures. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Joel. I'll now move on to our second priority, infrastructure security. At the moment, Canada lacks sufficient military resources to operate effectively. And at the same time, Canada's heavy reliance on international partners for manufacturing and processing has exposed us to risks for over-relying on supply chains. This has limited our ability to capture value domestically. And this reveals two key needs. First, Canada must strengthen its military infrastructure to build a proactive defense posture. And second, Canada must invest in domestic infrastructure to build robust supply chains in order to strengthen our economic security and sovereignty. Investment in dual-use infrastructure, which are assets that serve both civilian and military purposes, offers us a strategic solution. While the government references dual-use infrastructure, its application is limited. To address this, we recommend revising the evaluation criteria for projects of national interest under the Build Canada Act. This recommendation would introduce dual-use infrastructure as an optional but prioritized designation. The projects identified as both nationally significant and dual use would undergo a joint review by the Major Projects Office, or MPO, and the ADM of Infrastructure and Environment within D&D. Projects with this joint designation will benefit from expedited review and administrative support for existing federal defense funding. The rationale for this approach lies in its ability to increase military, economic, and trade capacity. Evaluating projects purely through a commercial lens overlooks the potential to scale up and repurpose infrastructure that is urgently needed for defense functions. And by embedding dual-use considerations into project selection, Canada strengthens military readiness while expanding domestic production and trade capacity, which is a proactive approach to both security and economic development. Next slide, please. Implementation would happen in two stages: a procedural amendment and administrative revision. So first, the Minister of National Defense would recommend the Governor and Council to amend the description and authorization of national interest projects under Bill C-5 to introduce a dual-use designation and give D&D review authority. Once approved, administrative changes can begin. The MPO's project intake form would be updated to include a dual-use self-identification field. And if approved by the MPO, the proposal would undergo a defense review within D&D. Approved dual-use projects would then proceed to the PMO for final authorization, and projects denied the dual-use designation will remain eligible for the standard review process. The estimated cost of this initiative is $1 million annually, primarily covering additional personnel needed for the review process. And this can be covered through the funding allocated to the MPO in Budget 2025. Dual-use projects will also be referenced for existing funding within the Defense Investment Agency and D&D, which is estimated at $900 million, with $10.2 billion in long-term funding also available. Downstream supply chain revenue generated from this infrastructure will also offset these costs over time. Next slide, please. There's several risks that may come with this recommendation. Concerns around Indigenous consultation and environmental protection are expected. However, this will be addressed through community and provincial briefings. In addition, introducing D&D to the review process could create administrative delays. To mitigate this, clear timelines and review criteria would be established to ensure efficiency. Some may also perceive this strategy as prioritizing military over civilian infrastructure, and this risk will be addressed through clear messaging that the dual-use designation is optional and is designed to strengthen economic independence while enhancing defense readiness. Communication for this plan would be posted on the MPO website, and briefings will take place with provinces, Indigenous partners, and industry to reaffirm consultation and environmental standards. Messaging will also prioritize three key points: protecting Canada by strengthening defense supporting infrastructure, reinforcing domestic supply chains, and building long-term economic resilience. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Yvonne. Finally, I will discuss our third priority, international security diversification. It's no secret that Canada's international security environment has fundamentally changed. For decades, we operated in a relatively stable, rules-based order anchored by a close partnership with the United States. That stability allowed Canada to be largely reactive, to respond to threats as they emerged. Today, that model no longer works. That means adopting a proactive approach, one that anticipates instability, reduces structural vulnerabilities, and strengthens Canada's ability to act independently when it matters. Now, Canada will always remain closely integrated with the United States. Our geography guarantees that. But resilience means ensuring we're never dependent on any single partner for our national security. So this is about shifting from dependence to diversification, from reliance to resilience. To do that, we're proposing what we call a strategic partnership diversification initiative, grounded in the idea of pragmatic internationalism. This is a two-pronged strategy designed to strengthen Canada's sovereignty, economic independence, and long-term security. The first prong focuses on deepening relationships with like-minded middle powers, specifically the EU, CANZUK partners, and key Indo-Pacific allies like Japan and South Korea. And these relationships can't just be symbolic. These partnerships must be comprehensive, with economic integration in critical sectors, expanded intelligence and defense cooperation, and increased diplomatic presence in key capitals. The second prong is about managing risk, specifically Canada's exposure to major manufacturing powers like China, India, and Brazil. These countries are central to global supply chains. Ignoring them isn't realistic, but engaging without structure creates vulnerability. So we propose pursuing disciplined economic engagement. We cooperate in clearly defined areas like critical minerals, energy, industrial manufacturing, while restricting cooperation in sensitive sectors like advanced tech, telecoms, or defense. That allows Canada to stay economically competitive while protecting our democratic institutions and national security. Next slide, please. Now to speak to our implementation strategy. Within 6 months, we propose establishing a National Security Partnership Secretariat inside the PCO. This gives us centralized coordination across GAC, D&D, and ICID, ensuring we act strategically and not reactively. Second, we negotiate structured partnership agreements using existing treaty authorities to formalize economic and security cooperation. And third, we reinvest in diplomatic capacity, particularly training junior officers within GAC. After all, long-term resilience requires institutional depth and preemptive capacity building. Implementation unfolds over 4 years. The estimated cost between $80 and $100 million annually is a deliberate investment in long-term security. The capital funding for this project will be sourced through reprioritization within Canada's existing international security spending increases as outlined in Budget 2025. Next slide, please. As to be expected, any proactive strategy has associated risks. One is potential vulnerabilities posed by major powers like China. This can be mitigated through structured engagement and clear sectoral safeguards. The second concern regards potential strain on Canada's relationship with the United States. Importantly, this strategy is deliberately designed to strengthen, not weaken, our alliance with the United States. This must be made evident throughout planning and implementation. Canada should reaffirm its commitments to NATO, NORAD, and North American defense cooperation, while framing foreign relations diversification as strengthening Canada's ability to contribute more effectively to collective Western security. Finally, our communication strategy. We recommend focusing on 3 messages. 1, this protects Canadian jobs by expanding global opportunities. 2, it strengthens sovereignty by reducing structural vulnerabilities. And 3, it prepares Canada for a more unstable world, not by reacting to crises, but by building capacity today. Canada can't control global instability, but it can control its individual preparedness. This strategic partnership diversification initiative ensures Canada is not reacting to present crises, but instead preparing for the future. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jared. At its core, this national security strategy rests on a simple premise. Canada cannot afford to remain reactive in an increasingly unpredictable world. Our strategy addresses Canada's core weaknesses through a proactive and resilient approach built around 3 mutually reinforcing priorities. First, enhanced Arctic security ensures Canada can assert sovereignty over its own territory, closing capability gaps and establishing a strong presence in the north. Second, critical infrastructure expansion ensures that we have the domestic industrial capacity for economic independence, creating both economic and strategic assets. Third, expanding foreign relations capacity gives Canada the flexibility to operate independently, reducing dependence and strengthening long-term geopolitical resilience. Individually, each priority strengthens Canada's position. Together, they reinforce one another. Arctic sovereignty requires infrastructure to support it. Improved critical infrastructure strengthens Canada's global partnerships, and diversified international partnerships reinforce Canada's sovereignty at home. Next slide, please. Our proposal, Proactive, Partnered, and Prepared, a new national security strategy for Canada, isn't a collection of isolated policies, but a cohesive strategy designed to embed resilience, into Canada's national security architecture. It ensures Canada is prepared and capable in an increasingly uncertain world. Thank you.
We are most thankful to the team from Carleton. I know we got up early on a Saturday morning, and I can't imagine all the work you've done over the last weeks. I'm very, very thankful. You've outlined a very broad strategy, both very specific on the Arctic and then related to infrastructure and the diversifying foreign relations. So you hit on a whole bunch of different points. I'm going to pass it over to my friend, my colleague Craig, to talk about some of the issues around collaboration and international, and he may have another specific question related to your presentation.
Thank you, Noah, and thanks to Carleton. Clearly, you've done a lot of thinking that cuts across this entire presentation, so appreciate the efforts you've made in preparing for today. So just on the collaboration piece, I wanted to dive in a little bit further on a couple of the pillars here. Arctic security and how you might leverage other partners, particularly international partners. It's a gigantic geographic area. Of course, monitoring, infrastructure requires some of the hard digital infrastructure and other kinds of infrastructure that's required, but you need cooperation from others. And I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit as to how you would leverage partnerships with others to make that work. And probably similarly on the critical infrastructure side, dual use, as you point out, it's quite a new approach that Canada's taking, and how we do that and identifying community benefits. Who in your mind are needing to work together? You sort of have defense as the lead there, but what are the departments, what are the partners are critical to identifying from a strategic point of view, the critical infrastructure from a dual use perspective that would be the most important to advance? So a couple of questions there, but along the lines of collaboration.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by speaking to the Arctic security point, especially with regards to the creation of a surveillance ecosystem. Attempting to reach that standard of full spectral dominance would integrate us further with the standards that are expected under our current partnership in NORAD, as well as with other defense partners under NATO. Essentially, our goal is to be able to provide our own clear sensor picture in order to have full intelligence on what's occurring within the Arctic, and therefore being able to have full decision-making capacity based off of that excellent sensor picture. So in essence, it integrates in the sense that having an effective surveillance ecosystem allows us to work better with our partners, especially in our defensive relationships with other states, in order to collectively engage in defense and enforcement mechanisms.
I would also be happy to jump in on the critical infrastructure side. So our recommendation tacks on to the Major Projects Office, which is under the Build Canada Act. So the Major Projects Office already has predefined consultation efforts that it does with Indigenous partners, different communities, environmental considerations. So these considerations and the key actors it should speak with are already built into the system. It's also important to acknowledge that these reviews happen beyond the federal level. There are also other levels of review that occur, but the defense review would specifically ensure that the dual use infrastructure benefits the military so they can take a more proactive approach in security.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much. One of the things you very briefly touched on was cyber and information and misinformation, and issues around, there are issues obviously around climate. I'm going to pass it to my colleague Kimberly to ask a question related to your strategy.
Great, thanks, and good morning. I found your presentation quite compelling in how it all sort of tied together, and I had a few questions, if I might, around the critical infrastructure component. So the first question is that a lot of, I think, the critical infrastructure that would be dual use is quite likely to be proposed for northern regions. And just to tie that back to climate, I know you said climate is something we can't control on our own, and I totally agree with you on that point. But if we're going to build infrastructure in the Canadian North, how would your strategy ensure that it is climate resilient in a region that is seeing immense impacts from climate change in terms of erosion and weather impacts, just all of the impacts of climate on that particular region. And if I might, on another related question to dual use infrastructure, how does your strategy address the potential for dual use infrastructure to become a single point of failure or a critical point of attack for foreign nations who may want to infiltrate that infrastructure through the civilian use component via cyber or AI means to get after weakening Canada's national security or impacting military operations? Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of the environmental piece, the Major Projects Office already has strict consultation efforts regarding environment considerations. They also speak with key Indigenous partners who are affected by this infrastructure to ensure any project, any national interest project that moves forward does consider these key prioritizations, and they're checked throughout the review process. And in terms of your piece around um, foreign actors who may want to use this infrastructure as exploiting its vulnerabilities. There are different types of dual use infrastructure. So, for example, some veer more towards civilian commercial use, and they're just occasionally used for military purposes. An example is in Finland, highways. They're built to be airplane runway strips as well as highways. So that's something that would be more difficult to exploit. There are also dual use infrastructure examples that are more military focused. So those having a diversification of different types of dual use infrastructure would definitely support that and mitigate those risks.
Do you have a follow-up question, Kimberly?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you. That was helpful.
Wonderful, thank you. In terms of implementation of some of the issues around operational and risk management, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Violetta.
Yeah, thank you, Noah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Vince-
apologize. Vincent has his hand up
That's right.
and he has a question. I apologize. Vincent?
Oh, no, and I didn't want to jump in. No, I just, after the regular questions, if we had time, I wanted to just ask a very specific question. So I don't want to take anybody else's time.
Perfect. We'll
Yeah.
get to you at the very end.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you, team, for your strategy and plan here. Now, there's always, when we put forward the strategies, a tension or a need to balance between strengthening capabilities over time, right? And then responding immediately as well to urgent issues and priorities. So how did you think about your strategy balancing these competing demands between addressing the present, but also addressing the future for longer term sustainment? Can you share some thoughts around that and how did you think about addressing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak on that. So our core vision for this new security strategy lies in the need to pivot from our traditional, more reactive approach to one that is grounded in proactivity. So the three priorities of our plan, proactive, partnered, and prepared, allows us to do so. With that, though, an aspect that we've considered in our proposal is to allow us to better address issues beyond just these three priorities, hitting on the urgency of current and long term. So, for example, the expansion of critical infrastructure for us allows us to actually better respond to future crises related to, for example, climate change. So this kind of is, so our approach here is grounded in an assessment of the immediacy and the urgency of right now, as well as the long term.
Very good, thank you.
Vincent?
Thank you very much, Noah. Appreciate it. I had a very specific question, and it's about your strategic partnership diversification strategy, which I was quite interested in. I thought that was really quite cool. You had some very interesting stuff in there. But you made a reference to the establishment of a national security partnership secretariat within PCO. And so I spent a fair chunk of my career at PCO. So I'm always interested when people have new ideas on how to beef up PCO. Can you tell me why PCO and what it's trying to fix? We've already got a national security intelligence advisor. We got a national security secretariat. We've got a foreign policy secretariat. Where is this going to fit in? What's it trying to solve?
Absolutely. If you could please navigate to slide 18, Appendix C.
The annexes.
Yes, yes. So this is a brief overview of what we're thinking for the National Security Partnership Secretariat. We specifically believe this should be in the PCO because it is best able to coordinate across departments and make sure that no one is stepping on each other's toes, make sure DND, GAC, and ICID all are able to cooperate independently while making sure that they have a collaborative effort. It also makes sure that there is accountability and we know where the buck stops.
I have to stop you there. We're at time. Thank you very much.